Climate change is accelerating with devastating effects across the globe, from sweltering heat and wildfires to torrential storms. We'll discuss what's at stake and how the world is responding. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. 2024 was the hottest year on record, and a new forecast says rising temperatures will likely break more heat records in the next 5 years. The World Meteorological Organization says we could break the 1.5 Celsius threshold again, threatening the most ambitious target of the Paris Climate Accord. We begin our coverage with this report from CGTN's Owen Fairclough.
From Spain's capital Madrid to the French city of Lyon. Early heat waves before the official start of summer, and hot on the heels of the warmest March on record. It's unsettling to be so hot. This must be because of global warming. If it's already 29 degrees centigrade in early May, what will it be like in August? Or the next 5 years? The World Meteorological Organization's latest report predicts there's an 80% chance of 2024's record for the hottest year will be broken over the next 5 years. And there are similar odds that global temperatures will rise 1.5 degrees centigrade above the 50-year average before 1900. That's the threshold an international treaty is trying to maintain to prevent potentially deadly climate change. Though the report's authors acknowledge that long-term warming over 20 years remains below that 1.5 degree benchmark. Even so, some countries continue to loosen environmental legislation, including the US. President Donald Trump withdrew the US from that treaty for a second time on the first day of his second term, though his administration is investing in nuclear power, considered a cleaner alternative to fossil fuels.
It's become very safe and environmental, yes, 100%.
And as Brazil prepares to host the latest international climate change conference in the Amazon region in November, lawmakers have just approved legislation that allows projects with a limited environmental impact to effectively bypass regulation. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Our first guest is a renowned environmental scientist and educator. Kaveh Madani is the director of the United Nations University's Institute for Water, Environment and Health. He joins us from Ontario, Canada. Kaveh Madani, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about that report from the World Meteorological Organization. It predicts that global temperatures will remain at or near record levels for the next 5 years. Now, 2024 was the hottest year on record, with a global mean temperature 1.55 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. What do you make of the report, its findings, and the impact it will have?
So one more warning to us that, not only the latest years have been the hottest year on record, but that this trend would continue and the situation would get even worse than what we have experienced. And I think, releasing these reports have the, typical impact in establishing the narrative, strengthening the narrative that we keep hearing about when it comes and is endorsed and published by UN organizations like WMO. We know there is substantial evidence, and it's not just a kind of an extrapolation without knowing the data, something that we have to rely on, the governments need to listen to. Unfortunately, though, the state of the world is such that these important warnings are being ignored. We remain hopeful that the next COP negotiations would take into account this report, along with a lot of other scientific evidence that is out there that is telling us that the situation keeps getting worse and worse.
Right, as you say, this is another warning to us, and this is a report that looks ahead. It looks to 5 years from now. What can be done right now to mitigate some of those effects?
I'm afraid that in the short term, within a 5 years period, we cannot, we cannot take any action that changes this trend. But the actions that we have been talking about over the last 10 years since the Paris Agreement have been all targeting slowing this trend and avoiding a more catastrophic future. Not much can be done within 5 years but a lot can be done to prevent a more catastrophic future if we are thinking about the mid-century and longer term, thinking about the longer term horizon. These short episodes, these are just to remind us what the world can look like. It's like, an episode of COVID-19 told us how crazy the world can be, how disruptions can, how serious they can be. I think the fires, the floods, the droughts, all those things that we see around us just tell us that this is not a sustainable way of life.
Right, now this coming December will mark 10 years since the adoption of the Paris Climate Accords, and the member signatories to that agreement agreed to limit the increase in global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels. What is your feeling on that? I mean, is that still achievable? Have we passed a point of no return? And, if we look at the consequences, are we going to see a lot more of what you just talked about, things like wildfires, droughts, as well as storms, and perhaps even more people migrating away from certain parts of the world?
We have reached the point of no return to what we had access to before, what we could enjoy before. But this doesn't mean that we cannot prevent an existential threat to humanity. We cannot stop that. We just have to stop what more severe consequences. Unfortunately, on the negative side, we are seeing lots of changes. We are seeing a lack of delivery and fulfillment of those commitments. A lot of countries got excited, made promises, and then that were not realized. But on the positive side, we are in a position that we were not in 10 years ago. Our new generations understand climate change. Our governments around the world understand climate change, even though political shifts create disruptions and changes in countries like the United States, and their leadership can create a lot of I would say problems down the road. But we have collectively achieved something big. This year, we will see countries revising and making new commitments. They're changing their NDCs and their national contributions plans, essentially. And we are hopeful that at least they would be more realistic and more aware and appreciative of what has happened and what they can deliver realistically. And I should say that this is important because we had a lot of global north countries, wealthy countries, developed countries, countries which have the best universities and scientists who made promises, but they didn't deliver.
Right, and despite all these warnings that we are getting, the data that we are seeing, I mean, we have, for instance, the Trump administration, which does not accept that climate change is a phenomenon caused by human activity. In fact, it's dismantled climate research programs and fired some of the country's top scientists. It is also no longer tracking the rise in greenhouse gases, which of course contribute to the rise in temperatures. I mean, what are the broad ramifications of these actions that have been taken by the Trump administration?
So it takes years to build trust, to negotiate international and multilateral deals, and it takes a short time for radical leaders to essentially break that trust and create some lasting damages. So there would be lasting impacts of what the U.S. administration is doing right now. Some countries were not joining the negotiations, we're not committing, and now they have a strong justification. If the United States, that has a historical responsibility for climate change, is not in the game, then why should others be? So these impacts would be lasting. But let's not also forget that the world is not appreciating what the United States is doing, and the nationalism campaign and all these things that would be happening. Some countries are replicating that, but collectively, if we look at how the world is responding, including the citizens of the United States, not everything being done by the current administration is being appreciated. On the positive note, I would say that the Trump administration's desire to invest more and study more the nuclear energy is a good thing, and it can also create some positive opportunities. It was an opportunity that we overlooked in the scientific community because of the past experiences that we have had, the negative experiences. So that can also open some doors. So disruptions come with a lot of cost, but also create opportunities for us to rethink and organize and do better.
All right, and there also is a lot of misinformation being disseminated right now. I mean, there are the conspiracy theorists who tell us that the whole fight against climate change is some plot to undermine the United States economy. I mean, how can scientists counter that?
So these might be new to the American environment, but these things have been going on for a long time in many other countries. These conspiracy theories have been there. Indeed, some of the countries of the global South always said that the countries of the North, now that they are post-development stage, they want to stop us from development, and that's why they are selling the climate change narrative to us. So for years we have been talking and fighting against misinformation and disinformation through evidence, through looking at what is available out there, and through creating narratives that connect well to the concerns of the society. Let's be honest, I think the scientific community also made a lot of strategic mistakes. We didn't appreciate the problems of people, the ongoing problems of people. If the economy is bad, if unemployment is an issue, if you're starving, if there are wars going on, you have no bandwidth to pay attention to climate change and think about the future. And I think there was a disconnect between some of the narratives that the scientific community, climate activists, and so on were promoting, and some of the concerns of the society. And the effect of that is what we are seeing in the political, I would say, landscape, and the shifts that we are seeing in many parts of the world, including Europe and the United States, North America. So this is also an opportunity for us to reflect, think about those better strategies that can help us connect with the problems of the people.
I want to look very quickly in the few minutes we have left to the COP30 conference, which will be taking place in Brazil in November. What are your hopes?
I'm hopeful that the new administration in Brazil is very, I would say, different. And it has big desires to not only use this opportunity for a good leadership and impactful leadership to make changes and to boost the fight against climate change, but also because this is happening in Brazil, this is happening in the Amazon, we will have new discussions about forests and how we want to manage ecosystem and biodiversity, the linkage of climate change fight with some other fights. So that's very, I would say, promising. And the Brazilians also want to tell us how the Global South also has been able to use their own technologies and solutions to cope with climate change, mitigate and adapt. And I think that's also a lesson, for lots of lessons for the world to learn from Brazil.
Kaveh, Madani, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For more on the climate crisis, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Phoenix, Arizona is Mahmoud. He's Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Climate and Water Initiative. Also with us from Delaware, Saleem Ali is a distinguished professor of energy and the environment at the University of Delaware. And here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio, Sweta Chakraborty is a risk and behavioral scientist and CEO of the U.S. operations for the climate advocacy group We Don't Have Time. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Sweta, great to see you. Let's start right here in the studio. Now, predictions are that this summer in the United States will be the hottest on record. And we just look at one state, California. It's bracing for temperatures of more than 40 degrees Celsius, and that's going to happen on Friday, this coming Friday. Is this the new normal? Are we going to see a lot more of this?
We're absolutely going to see a lot more of this. And this is the time that whoever is running the United States, in this case it happens to be Donald Trump and in his administration, they need to be stepping up and protecting the American people. But we just saw 28 American citizens killed in tornadoes in the American Midwest just recently. And these are the types of climate impact events that are going to increase in frequency and probability as we continue to release carbon into the atmosphere. We're going to see increased heat, we're going to see increased drought, increased tornadoes, and at a time when we need to be protecting Americans through early warning systems like that NOAA, the National Ocean Atmospheric Agency, provides as protection to Americans against these types of extreme weather events, it's being gutted. These agencies are being gutted. The Environmental Protection Agency is being gutted. This is an agency that was created with the purpose of protecting Americans in terms of just safe water and clean air. And those types of protections are being repealed by the current Trump administration. This is not what you would expect to see at a time when we are having increased extreme weather events in the United States and around the world.
Right. Sweta, there was a study done in 2024 by the Journal of the American Medical Association, also known as JAMA. It found that the number, you're talking about deaths, 28 people killed in those tornadoes. Well, it found that the number of heat-related deaths in the United States has risen by more than 117% since 1999. So the question is, how prepared is the country for this?
We don't have the proper infrastructure against heat in many parts of the United States, especially we see in Europe as well. So many deaths related to heat. It's becoming the leading cause of death. And it's not noticeable as much because, you know, I'm a behavioral scientist, so I talk about invisible risk. And heat is one of those invisible risks, right? It's not nearly as salient or sensational as a plane crash or as a terrorist attack. So for a long time, not enough resources, time, and attention have gone into protecting publics from heat. But the reality is the infrastructure is not in place. So HVAC systems, right, our cooling systems, they have to be weatherized to protect against extreme heat. The last thing you want is for your cooling to malfunction when you're already experiencing a heat-pressed area. And so this is the type of engineering that needs to be put in place in the United States and around the world, that engineering reinforcement of cooling. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see increased heat-related deaths.
And of course, that increases demands on energy as well.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
Right. Let me go to Mohammed. Mohammed, good to see you as well. Now, that report that we were talking about by the World Meteorological Organization found that there's an 80% chance of global temperatures will break at least one annual heat record in the next 5 years. We see that Arctic waters are predicted to warm 3.5 times faster than the global average, and the Amazon rainforest will suffer more droughts. I mean, what are the implications of all this, especially access to things like water?
You beat me to the punch, and I was actually going to bring up this report and that alarming statistic you raised, which specifically the WMO update report said that in the next 5 years, it focused on the period 2025 to 2029, that there's an 80% chance that within that period, we would have a new global heat record. The current one stands as of last year, and it almost feels like every subsequent year we're breaking the record. Another interesting note to get to your question is within this 5-year period, it also noted that the average compared to the historical average is going to be somewhere between 1.2 degrees Celsius and 1.9 degrees Celsius. And if you recall, the thresholds that we're always concerned about when we think about long-term warming is the 1.5 degrees Celsius and the 2 degree Celsius increase. That basically tells us that there is a very likely chance that on a year-to-year basis, not the long-term average, that every year, that within these next few years, several years could exceed that 1.5 degree centigrade threshold on an annual basis, and to a much smaller likelihood also potentially hit that 2 degrees Celsius. So what does that mean when you think about warming and impact to the natural environment, oceans, and forests and things like that? Well, we don't really have to look far, because if it's going to be warmer than what we've just experienced, just look at what has been happening over the last few years in terms of warming, in terms of drought, in terms of extreme weather, in terms of wildfires, far and near. Amazon, of course, is a huge plot of land in terms of green area, but this is going to impact areas expansive or not. And just the simple way to think about it is what we've been seeing over the last few years, more of that and more amplified versions of that.
Right, Mohammed, and very quickly, if you can, do you also believe that we've reached a point of no return?
You know, that's always a difficult question to answer because I'd rather be somewhat optimistic in the sense that we have some control with what we can do, but certainly without action and sort of just being reactive at best, which is where the world is now, that window is rapidly closing.
Saleem Ali, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Now, we also, in addition to seeing higher temperatures, we're seeing heating start a lot earlier, and we're seeing evidence of that. In April, much of India and Pakistan faced temperatures rising above 40 degrees Celsius. So these spring heat waves that we see in those regions, what do they mean?
Well, I think it's now clear that we need to develop adaptive structures for human habitation that are much more aligned with the changing temperatures and the scale and scope of this change. Previously, we had been focusing far too much on mitigation, understandably so, because there was the moral hazard concern that if we focused on adaptation, then people would try to avoid mitigating emissions. However, I think at this point, we need to now invest far more on adaptation. That is becoming clear. 90% of climate financing until around 2020 was going into climate mitigation. Only 10% was going into adaptation. I think that will eventually need to be reversed at some point because the mitigation part, especially because of the tipping points dynamic, unfortunately, we are passing that point. So what do we mean by adaptive structures? In some cases, there can be win-win opportunities also. So for example, if we have people living in more traditional architecture in the Gulf states, in Dubai, they did not always have air conditioning there. There are ways to have low energy, heat adaptive architecture. We need to invest in that. People living underground in places like Coober Pedy in Australia, where the temperature often is more than 45 degrees Celsius. People have lived underground for decades. We need to think about those structures as well. So I think that's where this heat adaptation will need to go. And we need to start planning for it now.
Sweta, let's look at the United States, where much of what is happening is actually going in the opposite direction.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, scientists say that the Trump administration is dismantling the government's ability to monitor the climate changing data that we're seeing all the time. And then the hundreds of scientists who had been working on the National Climate Assessment, that was a report that was mandated by the United States Congress, they've been told they no longer needed. And this report would detail how global warming is affecting specific regions in this country. So what is going to be the impact of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the information I need to be able to do my job as a behavioral scientist, as a communicator, to let communities know how to safeguard themselves. And it's not being even made available to top-line communicators. So we're seeing so much of this language being removed and wiped off of websites across agencies in the United States, from the EPA to NOAA. And that is going to be of serious detriment to America's safety in anticipation of these extreme weather events. I agree very much with Saleem on this panel, who's saying we need to come up with creative and innovative approaches to adapt to these extreme weather events. And the Rockefeller Foundation, like he stated, is stepping in to do that, but this should be coming from the federal government. Yeah. This is a service the government provides American citizens, like the early weather detection system that NOAA is being dismantled at NOAA, which costs American taxpayers $4 a day. Right. That is worth it. That is an insurance amount to pay to protect yourself and your family from tornadoes and hurricanes and droughts and flooding. Why is that being dismantled? So it's these types of real asinine repeals that have been put in place for decades to protect the American people that are ultimately going to harm Americans. And it's not just about public health and safety, it's economic harm. So we are seeing 830,000 jobs that would have been in clean energy by 2030 being taken off the table. And we know that not all Republicans and conservatives in the United States are happy about that. We see representative from a Republican district, Andrew Garbarino, for example, sit out on this most recent vote that is pushing this bill to take away those 830,000 jobs from the American public. He sat out and didn't vote for it, for example, because it's harming his district. So it's hurting jobs, it's hurting health. many harms.
Okay, Mohammed, there was a report published by Arizona State University. It found that groundwater is rapidly disappearing from the Colorado River Basin. Over 20 years, it's been estimated that the equivalent of the full capacity of Lake Mead has been lost, and that's the largest reservoir in the United States. Now, this basin, of course, provides water to about 40 million people. It also provides water to millions of acres of farmland. What is your assessment on that report?
Well, it's an interesting report, and it highlights something that is often neglected when we talk about the impact of drought and climate change to water resources, which is groundwater, right? It's the unseen aspect of our freshwater resources. Certainly, surface water systems are much like the Colorado River, visible. We have a lot of reservoirs and dams, gauging stations, information that gives us sort of quantity of that supply. But groundwater, and certainly for a place like Arizona, which has historically relied on groundwater before the building of particular canal systems to divert water from the Colorado River to central Arizona, has really been the backbone of this state's supply system, and frankly, a lot of other places in the Southwest. I do appreciate what the report is putting out, because I frankly am a firm believer of you can't manage what you can't measure. And so having that piece of information of just at a minimum level awareness of what's happening with our groundwater resources is key, but also highlighting the importance of that resource. It's not just about surface water. And in fact, in places like Arizona, groundwater is used as almost a storage system underground, because it doesn't, there's vast aquifers where water can be stored, but also doesn't suffer the effects of evaporation, evapotranspiration like large reservoir systems would.
Well, you know, Saleem, there are those climate change skeptics here in the United States who say that if these measures are going to be implemented, then it would sacrifice the United States economy. But there are also others, like the managing director of the World Economic Forum, who says that this global energy transition that we should see is an urgent necessity as well as an opportunity. So let's listen to some of what she had to say.
We have to think of the energy transition as an opportunity for industry transformation. It is about cutting waste. In fact, it is about making better use of nature with solar, with wind. It's about driving more efficiencies, cutting costs. There is demand for new skills, new capabilities, and that in itself presents a significant opportunity for all economies to think about the energy transition as an opportunity to transform industry, create jobs, and stimulate new engines of growth.
So, Saleem, what are your thoughts on what she had to say?
Yes, I think overall the win-win opportunities, the low-hanging fruit is still there to be taken. And as Sweta was saying, the jobs that could be created from this is remarkable, that we are turning now the corner where those jobs may not potentially be available because of public sector decisions in the US. I think we need to think of this strategy in terms of what is called green growth. There is a Global Green Growth Institute, which was established after the COP15 meeting in Copenhagen many years ago, or more than 15 years ago, which is now based in South Korea. And I think that is an important organization which can help us to build on the kind of work that the World Economic Forum is highlighting.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington.